A body has surfaced in the Nevada desert, not buried, not recently killed. It was found stuffed inside a corroded steel barrel sunk decades ago in over 100 feet of water. As of this year, the lake that was supposed to hide it forever is gone. Over 2.7 trillion gallons of water have vanished, exposing a secret buried since the 1970s. People are now walking on a cracked, sun-scorched lake bed that was once America's largest watery vault. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department has just opened a homicide investigation for a murder that took place nearly half a century ago. On the bottom of Lake Mead, the desert floor is finally giving up its ghosts. But here is the detail that tells the real story. On May 1st, 2022, boaters near Hemenway Harbor spotted a rusted barrel lodged in the mud, not on the shore, but far out in a bay where the water had receded by dozens of feet. Inside were the skeletal remains of a man shot in the head, execution style. And the strangest part of this story is not that a body was found near Las Vegas. It is that the primary witness to the crime, the lake itself, is disappearing, and in its place, it is leaving a trail of evidence stretching back 80 years. To understand what is happening, you have to understand the lake and the secrets it was designed to keep. The discovery began on a Sunday afternoon. The water level at Lake Mead had fallen to roughly 1,050 feet above sea level, the lowest it had been since the Hoover Dam first filled the canyon in the 1930s. At Hemenway Harbor, a prominent marina on the Nevada side, the shoreline was a ghost of its former self. A vast expanse of bleached mud separated the docks from the new water's edge. It was in this newly exposed zone that the barrel was found. Las Vegas Homicide Lieutenant Jason Johansson arrived at a scene that he later said he never dreamed he would see. His investigators were looking at a relic, a time capsule from the era of mob-run casinos and desert burials. The victim's clothing, a Kmart brand shirt and shoes, told them the murder likely happened sometime between the mid-1970s and the early 1980s, a period when this exact kind of disposal was a dark part of the city's folklore. Someone drove a boat hundreds of yards from shore into water they believed was a permanent abyss and dropped a man in a barrel overboard. They never calculated that a 21st century megadrought would arrive 45 years later to drain the evidence. Curious what you think about this actually? A random discovery or a calculated risk that just ran out of time? It felt like the opening scene of a forgotten gangster film. But it was just the beginning. The water was confessing. Just 6 days later, on May 7th, 2022, another set of human remains surfaced near Colville Bay, miles north of the barrel discovery. This was not a mob hit. Forensic experts from the Clark County Coroner's Office, led by Melanie Rouse, would later identify the remains through DNA. It was Thomas Peter Erndt, a 42-year-old father from Las Vegas, who had drowned on August 2nd, 2002. He had jumped from a boat at night, a playful moment that turned tragic. For 20 years, his family had no answers. Now the receding lake had given him back. The water kept falling. 2 months later, in July, something else emerged from the mud near Hemenway Harbor. Not a body, but a piece of history. A World War II-era Higgins boat, an LCVP landing craft of the type that stormed the beaches of Normandy. It wasn't a casualty of war. It was bought as military surplus after 1945, used for a time to survey the Colorado River, and then intentionally scuttled when it was no longer needed. For decades, it was a popular scuba diving site. Now, it rests fully exposed on dry land. The lake was peeling back its layers, 1 decade at a time. The discoveries accelerated. On July 25th, more skeletal remains were found at Boulder Beach. More were found in the same area on August 6th, and again on August 16th. It was a forensic puzzle. Melanie Rouse's team worked for months, piecing together DNA evidence from the scattered bones. They belonged to Claude Russell Pinsinger, a 52-year-old veteran who had vanished while fishing with his brother on July 14, 1998. Then in October, at Colville Bay, the lake gave up another ghost, this one from even further back in time. The remains of Donald Paul Smith, a 39-year-old who fell from his sailboat and drowned on April 27, 1974. His body had been lost to the lake for 48 years. Each discovery was a headline, a mob graveyard, the internet called it. But only one was a homicide. The others were ordinary, heartbreaking tragedies. For the coroner, Melanie Rouse, the work was about untangling the myth from the reality. As she stated, one of the reasons they do what they do is to provide closure, to return these unidentified individuals back to their families with a name. The work her team is doing is pretty incredible. We cover a lot of these deep dive stories, the ones that connect science, history, and human impact. If you want more videos like this, subscribing is the best way to see them. Zoom out, and the geography makes the mechanism clear. Lake Mead is not a natural lake. It is the largest man-made reservoir in the United States, a massive basin created on September 30th, 1935, when the Hoover Dam began to impound the Colorado River. It's an artificial inland sea stretching 112 miles through the desert of Nevada and Arizona. For most of the 20th century, it was a symbol of American ambition, providing water and power to 40 million people across the Southwest. It reached its peak capacity in 1983, with the water level at 1,229 feet above sea level. It has never been full since. The cause is a convergence of factors. Decades of systemic overuse, a population explosion in desert cities like Las Vegas and Phoenix, and a climate change-driven megadrought, the worst in over 1,200 years. The Colorado River itself is carrying less water. The result is a stark visual record of loss. A towering 150-foot-high white band now circles the entire shoreline of the lake. It is often called a bathtub ring, but here's the detail that tells the real story. That white band isn't just dried salt or calcium carbonate. It is a permanent geological scar. The water sat stagnant against the sandstone for so long that it chemically bleached the iron and manganese out of the rock. Even if the lake drained completely, the ring would remain a pale monument to the 2.7 trillion gallons of water that are no longer there. This is the part the headlines do not capture. The lake is not just revealing human remains. It is uncovering entire chapters of history. Before the Hoover Dam, the valley floor was home to the settlement of St. Thomas, Nevada. Founded by Mormon pioneers in 1865, it was a thriving agricultural town at the confluence of the Muddy and Virgin Rivers. When the federal government decided to build the dam, the town was condemned. Residents were paid for their land and forced to leave. By 1938, the rising waters of the newly formed Lake Mead had completely submerged St. Thomas. The last resident reportedly paddled away from his home as the water lapped at his doorstep. For 80 years, the town existed only in photographs and the memories of a few descendants. Divers would sometimes explore the submerged foundations. By 2005, during a previous drought, the highest points of the town began to reappear. Today, the entire town site is exposed. You can walk down dusty streets that were once 60 feet underwater. You can see the foundations of the old schoolhouse, the hotel, the remnants of concrete staircases leading to nowhere. It's an entire American ghost town, sacrificed to create the lake, now resurrected by its decline. It is an unbelievable sight. If you find this as fascinating as I do, a like on the video helps more people see it. Or just send it to someone who'd appreciate the history. The lake is also surrendering its military history. On July 21, 1948, a Boeing B-29 Superfortress crashed into the water. This was not a World War II combat flight. The plane's serial number 45-21847 was a stripped-down F-13 variant, a Cold War flying laboratory. Its mission was secret, involving atmospheric research for developing a sun-based guidance system for ballistic missiles. The crew of 5 all survived the crash, but the massive bomber sank to the bottom. For decades, it was a challenging deep-water dive, visible only to the most experienced technical divers. As the water level plummeted past 1,050 feet, the B-29 became accessible at much shallower depths, making it one of the most unique wreck dives in the world. The drought that exposed a mob victim from the 1970s also brought a top-secret Cold War aircraft from the 1940s into the light. The lake is functioning like a receding glacier, spitting out everything the desert swallowed over the last century in reverse chronological order. First, the victims of the 2000s and 1990s. Then the mob victim of the 70s. Then the military surplus of the 50s and the Cold War technology of the 40s. And finally, the pioneer town of the 1860s. Each foot the water drops is like turning back a page of a history book written on the landscape itself. Now, here's the part nobody is putting on the news. The vanishing lake is not just a historical curiosity. It is an existential threat to the entire American Southwest, and it is forcing a high-stakes engineering gamble just to keep one of America's most famous cities alive. The entire water system of the Colorado River, managed by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, is based on a series of critical elevation numbers at Lake Mead. At 1,035 feet above sea level, 12 of the Hoover Dam's 17 massive turbines can no longer operate effectively. Hydropower generation, which powers parts of Nevada, Arizona, and California, is slashed by up to 70%. As a desperate countermeasure, in May of 2026, the Bureau allocated $52 million for new wide-head turbines specifically designed to generate some power at these historically low levels. It is a patch on a failing system. The real number that haunts water managers is 895 feet. This is dead pool. It is the elevation at which the water is too low to flow past the Hoover Dam at all. At that point, the river downstream effectively runs dry. The flow of water to Arizona, Southern California, and Mexico simply stops. In the face of this ticking clock, one city made a multi-billion-dollar bet on its own survival. Las Vegas gets 90% of its water from Lake Mead. For years, the Southern Nevada Water Authority, or SNWA, watched the water level drop closer and closer to the elevation of their two existing intake pipes. They realized that in a dead pool scenario, the city would die of thirst. So they launched one of the most audacious and expensive water infrastructure projects in American history. It is officially called Intake No. 3, but it's better known as the third straw. Starting in 2008, engineers began boring a massive tunnel 3 miles long and 24 feet in diameter, directly underneath Lake Mead. It was a $1.4 billion project, an incredible feat of engineering designed to do one thing: act as a drain at the very bottom of the bathtub. The third straw's opening sits at an elevation of 860 feet, deep below the dead pool line. It is a survival hatch. Even if the lake drops so low that the Hoover Dam goes dry and California gets nothing, the third straw can continue to suck water from the lake's deepest trenches, keeping the taps on in Las Vegas. Erica Moonen, the project manager for the SNWA, oversaw this monumental effort. It was a race against time, drilling beneath a dying lake to save a city in the desert. The project was completed in 2015, and a low lake-level pumping station connected to it came online in 2020. Las Vegas, in other words, has secretly drought-proofed itself, but only by ensuring it can be the last one drinking from a rapidly emptying glass. And then there is the existential question buried in the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation's own data. The problem is accelerating. In late May of 2026, the agency released a 24-month study with a dire forecast. It predicted that without significant changes in water usage, and with average snowfall, Lake Mead could drop to a new record low of 1,020 feet by the summer of 2027. Scientists advising the agency have formally warned that the entire Colorado River system faces a total system crash. By 2028, David Creamer, a hydrology professor at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, has called it a desperate time on the Colorado River. The 7 states that rely on the water are locked in brutal negotiations over who must cut their usage, and by how much. The original 1922 Colorado River Compact, which divided the water, was based on data from an unusually wet period. It allocated more water than the river actually carries in a typical year. For a century, Lake Mead acted as the savings account to cover that deficit. Now that account is nearly empty. For now, the mysteries the lake has offered up remain only partially solved. The Hemenway Harbor Doe, the man in the barrel, is still unidentified as of mid-2026. Despite the LVMPD and the FBI releasing advanced 3D facial reconstructions of the victim in late 2023, his name remains unknown. The gangster who put him there likely died of old age, never imagining his crime would be laid bare by the sun. The families of Thomas Erndt, Claude Pensinger, and Donald Smith have an answer, a final resting place, a measure of peace brought by the very crisis that threatens millions. The re-emerged town of St. Thomas has become a protected archaeological site managed by the National Park Service, a tourist attraction born from a looming catastrophe. It stands as a silent reminder that this has all happened before, that the water gives and the water takes away. We see the crumbling foundations and imagine a future where our own cities are the ruins. Most people who watch this long forget to subscribe, so if you made it this far, maybe consider it. The crisis has forced a reckoning. The slow-motion disappearance of America's largest reservoir is no longer a future projection. It is a present-day reality written in bleached rock and exposed history. The lake that powered the growth of the modern West is now revealing the consequences of that growth. One sunken boat, one ghost town, one forgotten victim at a time. The frantic engineering and desperate political negotiations are not about restoring the lake. It is now about managing its decline. It is about learning to live with less. So, 3 questions hang over the shrinking basin tonight. How many more secrets does the lake bed still hold? waiting in the mud for the water to fall another 10, 20, or 50 feet. Can 21st century engineering and political deals solve a crisis driven by a century of consumption and a changing climate? And what happens to the dream of the American West when its largest water bank finally declares bankruptcy? The bleached sandstone of the bathtub ring is right now baking in the Nevada sun, a permanent scar 150 feet tall. The foundations of St. Thomas are quiet, their stones holding the heat of a desert that has reclaimed its own. And deep beneath the surface, unseen and unheard, water is right now being pulled through a 3-mile tunnel, flowing silently under the desert floor to keep the fountains of Las Vegas running, even as the world it was built upon vanishes into thin air.